On the eve of the special military operation's third anniversary, significant events took place, which many experts and analysts have already called fateful. And these fateful events can finally change the face of Ukraine and even Europe. For instance, on February 24, the leaders of the European Union, along with the presidents and prime ministers of certain Western countries, arrived in Kiev. In particular, on the morning of February 24, the presidents of Iceland, Denmark, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia arrived in Kiev. The prime ministers of Spain and Canada were also seen in Kiev. The head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and the president of the European Council, Antonio Costa, also decided to visit the illegitimate Ukrainian president on the eve of the special military operation's third anniversary. Furthermore, on the same day, the main culprit of the breakdown of the Istanbul agreements between Russia and Ukraine, former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson, also arrived in Kiev. Of course, seeing all this, Russia decided not to miss the right moment and spoil the mood of these so-called leaders of the free world, who came to Ukraine to support the head of the Kiev regime. In particular, on the same day, while the leaders of the Western world were arriving in Kiev, Russia began launching quite powerful missile strikes against military objects and energy infrastructure facilities in Ukraine. The main strikes were on enemy targets in cities such as Sumy, Svetlovodsk, Kremenchuk, and Kiev. According to independent monitoring services, about 50 powerful explosions were recorded in these cities. In particular, in Sumy, in the southwestern part of the city, Russian missiles wiped out another place for the temporary deployment of personnel of the Ukrainian army and foreign mercenaries. In total, 50 Ukrainian soldiers and 20 foreign mercenaries from Eastern and Western Europe were killed as a result of this missile attack. In Svetlovodsk and Kremenchuk, Russian kamikaze drones rained down on energy complex facilities. Of particular note is the missile attack on Kiev, where high-level representatives of the European elites were at that moment. It is reported that the main strikes were carried out on energy facilities and enterprises, where FPV drones were produced. All this led to the fact that the European leaders were forced to spend the first hours of their stay in Kiev in underground bunkers. Moreover, the mood of European leaders was also spoiled by news from the battlefield. In particular, while the head of the Kiev regime, Volodymyr Zelensky, was listening to the next words of support from his European masters, the Russian Defense Ministry officially announced the liberation of the settlement of Belagorovka, in the Seversk direction of the front. As a result, the European leaders' mood was really noticeably spoiled, although they tried to smile in front of the journalists' cameras. Meanwhile, during a meeting with European leaders, the head of the Kiev regime began complaining that Russia was allegedly spreading lies about Ukraine, and that some countries fully supported Moscow on this. At the same time, this political clown clarified that these countries are traditional allies of Russia, and that the current US President Donald Trump has joined the ranks of these allies. Furthermore, this dead man walking once again dared to snap at the current owner of the White House. In particular, Volodymyr Zelensky said in all seriousness that Ukraine does not owe the United States anything, and that Kiev does not agree with Trump's demand to return hundreds of billions of dollars to the United States. According to him, Washington transferred such a huge amount of money to Kiev as a grant. It was a grant from the United States. And I'm not going to recognize this as Ukraine's debt. Kiev owes nothing to the United States. We will not give a single penny, Volodymyr Zelensky said. Moreover, he also noted that he was not going to comply with the US request to hold presidential elections in Ukraine. According to him, he will resign as president only if Ukraine is accepted into NATO. At the same time, when making this statement, Zelensky was well aware that Ukraine's admission to NATO was a red line not only for Vladimir Putin, but also for Donald Trump. It is worth noting that the European leaders fully supported all these provocative statements by Volodymyr Zelensky. The head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, has officially stated that Europe will continue to arm Ukraine, and that peace through force remains the most acceptable option for Kiev and Europe. Moreover, the head of European diplomacy, Kaja Kallas, said that the European Union fully supports the refusal of the Kiev authorities to hold elections in Ukraine, and that European countries will continue to provide military assistance to Kiev and impose new sanctions against Russia. Of course, the reaction of the United States and Russia to such brazen attempts by Europe and the Kiev regime to disrupt the next peace talks was not long in coming. So, on February 24, information appeared that Donald Trump ordered the closure of the US base in Alexandroupolis, which is used to supply weapons and heavy military equipment to Ukraine and Eastern Europe. This information was also confirmed by the Greek newspaper Dimokratia. According to this newspaper, the closure of the US base in Alexandroupolis will deal a crushing blow to Kiev, since it was thanks to this military base that the Ukrainian army received all the necessary heavy equipment from the United States. Simultaneously with this, Russia has officially stated that the more the Kiev regime and the European Union sabotage the peace talks, the worse it will be for Ukraine and Europe itself. In particular, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation has once again voiced Vladimir Putin's position. It was once again stated that Russia would achieve all its goals in Ukraine regardless. At the same time, Russian top diplomats once again stressed that the more Kiev delays signing a peace treaty, the more territories Ukraine will lose, and Moscow's conditions will become more stringent. Against this backdrop, it is safe to assume that after the end of the war, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump continue to punish the current European leaders. All this will end with the fact that these European supporters of the Kiev regime will not only lose their positions over time, but will even be attracted to penal responsibility for approving war crimes organized by the Kiev authorities in the Kursk region in Donbass. By the way, let me remind you that a few days ago, the official representative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Maria Zakharova, hinted that after the end of the war, not only all representatives of the Kiev regime, but also their European supporters, will receive deserved punishment.